one and all present here. I, on behalf of OCS JGBS, welcome you to the session on global investment scenario and focus of venture capital. We are proud to host Mr. Tushar Kansal, who is the founder, CEO of Consultancy Ventures and founder of Saffron First. Mr. Tushar is an accomplished professional with experience spanning multiple sectors from venture capital, Big Four consulting, to CFO of Guggenheim Partners owned company. He is an adept strategic planner with proven history in mergers and acquisitions, private equity, and debt advisory. He has been mentoring many business startups and business leaders. Mr. Tushar has expertise of identifying new growth avenues, developing innovative strategies, financial and business advisory, fundraising, wealth management, and high performing teams. His expert opinion is often sought by leading business news channels and publications like CNN News 18, BCTV, Business World, Business and Economy, CROIS, and Digital Market Asia. He received executive education from Harvard Business School, MBA in Finance from University of Delhi, and BTech from the Technological Institute of Textile and Sciences. We are proud to invite you to take the session ahead, sir.
Thank you for inviting me today to this wonderful topic, which we all are mesmerized and we all are looking up to startups who solve new problems and come out with innovative business models. And it just like it excites a lot of people who are here listening to this important subject. The same way it excited me, and that's why I took a plunge from my corporate journey to this space, and it has been very exciting. In the last 7 years, I have interacted with more than 3,000 startups, more than 600 global investors from venture capital funds, angel investors from private equity funds, and so on and so forth. So, the topic today is global venture capital ecosystem. Why is it important? Because everybody is chasing returns. So, when we are talking about returns, if you invest your money in a fixed deposit, you get 4.5% post-tax return. And if you invest your money, if you are a citizen of US or Europe, you get 0.25, 0.5% return. If you are a citizen of Japan, if you are putting your money in a bank, you have to pay the bank to keep your money safe. Safe as in you can't expect a return because the interest rates are negative. So what is happening is the better way of getting a return has been to invest and invest across asset classes. So we are talking about stock markets, we are talking about commodities, we are talking about cryptocurrencies, and so this particular the global venture capital ecosystem is all the result of a lot of money chasing returns. And when we see the headlines, we see numbers like one particular fund of Sequoia Capital, which had invested in WhatsApp, sold WhatsApp for $19 billion. Now the investors who had put in 30 to 40 million dollars, they got a return on of $19 billion. We see Tesla. So Tesla just made a profit in its entire history, a very small profit, and the market capitalization of Tesla on the stock exchange is $900 billion. So, this is more than the combined market capitalization of all auto companies, the large ones. So people see this, people get very enthused by these numbers. We see, what are our poster boys? Our poster boys are Mr. Ratan Tata, Mr. Mukesh Ambani. We see the startup guys whose startups are now more than $1 billion, which are called unicorns, and because of all these, tremendous amount of wealth which is created, it enthuses us. Now, why it is more interesting is because when in earlier times a middle class person wanted to become rich, he either did a job in a big company or invested in some real estate or opened a small business. But after Mr. Narayan Murthy created India's first original IT company and made it successful and made it worth thousands of crores, the middle class dreams took off. And that was the time when 1991 and post that, so middle class knew that the technology is a way in which you can get rich by doing your own business, by entrepreneurship, by creating value. And look at what happened. We saw the 99 dot-com boom and bust. We saw 2008 Lehman Brothers crisis, and now we saw COVID. And the common thread in all these three happenings has been the march of technology. So we see companies like Flipkart getting sold for $21 billion, in a span of practically 7 to 8 years of existence, 12 years of existence. We see Zomato, Swiggy crossing $5 billion valuation, being the leaders in food tech space. We see Big Basket and Grofers being commanding valuations north of $3 billion. So why is how is this ecosystem functioning? So what has happened is that the Western economies, which grew earlier because of a lot of legacy reasons, at some point in time, their whole markets became saturated, and they decided that the only way to get more value out of those companies is by
Yeah.
outsourcing. Somebody is not on mute. Yeah, is by outsourcing jobs to cheaper places, so they could save on labor, and labor was a big component. So a lot of these companies from the West, they moved out and they set up a shop in China, in Southeast Asia, in South Korea, in Japan, and so on. And India missed the bus. India missed the manufacturing bus. And so just like India missed the semiconductor bus. So what happened was the Western economies started concentrating their economies on services, and services include technology and financial services. So they said we will maintain high tech industry, and we will maintain companies who know how to manage cash. Now these two things gives them a lot of leverage over the global economy, because dollar is the reserve currency in which the global trade happens even till date. Euro is the second preference, and third is Japanese yen, and fourth, yuan is coming. So because of these factors, the Western economies majorly consist of financial services sector and the high tech companies. And a lot of value is being created by the mix of these two factors. Just to give an example, since the time COVID came, it is probably 1 year, right? Within a span of 1 year, $15 trillion of currency has been printed and put out in the system by US, Europe, and the Western economies. You can very well imagine this kind of liquidity. It is sloshing around the world. It is entering asset classes. It is making the pricing of things go through the roof. So that's one reason why Tesla's stock is where it is. Just like Mr. Mukesh Ambani, he said in a talk in a sorry annual general meeting of Reliance that data is the new oil. So, he made his entire riches from oil, and now he's moving away from oil towards a data-led business, which is Geo. And why? Because the valuations commanded by tech companies are exponentially more than commanded by traditional industries. Oil will go down because there has been a lot of research and development which has happened on lithium ion batteries, on solar panels, on wind turbines, and the pricing of power produced by solar, wind, and lithium ion is less than as produced by oil and gas. And so the days of oil and gas is gone. Uh, this has meant the coming age of new industries. To give you an example, there are, I think, 6 billion people in this world. Out of 6 billion, the fan companies are Facebook, Amazon, Google, Netflix, and the Apple. These five companies. Between the five of them, they have mapped the entire global population, almost 5 billion out of 6 billion, on 700 parameters. That is the amount of data they have about you, which you even don't have any idea about. So, whenever you speak on the phone, you are talking about a purse. The moment you go on the internet, you'll start to see advertisements about companies who are selling a purse. If you go on any social media, they listen to you. If you have Alexa at your home, it listens to you. So data has become the new way of generating money. And how much money it can earn? Facebook has a turnover of more than $70 billion and market capitalization of the company in excess of $1 trillion. Amazon is $2 trillion. Google is more than $1 trillion. Apple is $2 trillion. India's entire GDP in a year is $2.7 trillion, and we have these companies who are more than $2 trillion. So you can imagine that what data has done to these companies. Now, what has happened is that the amount of control these companies have over the entire tech ecosystem has prompted many governments to take action. So, what happens is if you are a startup company and you want to grow your company and then you are looking for more and more investments, then you at some point in time, if you create a very unique technology, Google will buy you out, or Facebook will buy you out, or any good Indian company like Byju's, they bought Akash, and Byju's bought White Hat Junior. So they are creating monopolies across sectors, and that's where the opportunity lies for you as students. Focus on upskilling, cross skilling, focus on reskilling, focus on skilling yourself. And if you want to skill yourself, all the tools available are out there. They are easily accessible to you. Now, coming to the part, what is venture capital doing? What venture capital does is that uh, it searches for new ideas and how those new ideas can be. They should be uh, converted into a minimum viable product, MVP. What does an MVP means? A product which people want or a service which people want, which sells at a particular price, which is easily scalable. So if it sells in India, you can just plug and play and put it across countries and sell it across countries easily. So that is what an MVP they look for. Then product market fit. It means if there is a food tech product, now you know that in India there is a trend of family cooking. There is a lot of belief that a family should cook the food and we should have food at home. But this is not true of US, Europe, Japan, Southeast Asia. People eat out a lot. Now, if you are trying to create a product, a food product in India, does not necessarily mean that the same product will sell across Japan, Southeast Asia, and so on. But it does mean that because India is a very price sensitive, quality sensitive, service sensitive, India is a very sensitive customer market. So, whatever product market fit is achieved in India, generally what happens is that that product tends to do very well in other markets as well. So, how does an investor look at Indian companies? Indian companies have very high human resource quality. They have to be trained a lot initially, but the service quality is good. The PMF product market fit achieved in India, which means pricing, distribution strategy, and product specifications, all these form a part of product market fit. The PMF achieved in India generally tends to do very well in any market you go. Secondly, India is a large consumer market. To give you a perspective, our GDP is $2.7 trillion. That is in dollar terms. If you look at in rupee terms, our GDP is $11 trillion. It is almost the third largest, not almost, it is the third largest economy in the world after China first, US second. On purchasing power parity terms, PPP. On PPP terms, we are $11 trillion, which means that the rupee is very weak against the dollar. But otherwise, if you look at the economy, there is a huge consumption. So, GDP consists of investments, exports, and consumption. In India, investments have been lagging, especially after 2012, when a lot of these 20 lakh crore worth of loans were given by public sector banks. Uh, Exports have been not so much, it's around $300 billion, but consumption is very strong. And because India is a big consumer market, so all these companies, Amazon and Unilever and Vodafone, all these companies are after India in the consumer sector. Not so much in the infra sector, not so much in other sectors, but in consumer sector. And this means that venture capital funds, they really focus on consumer B2B and consumer B2C, business to business and business to consumer companies. And look at Fireside Ventures. It recently raised $118 million fund to invest in consumer businesses. Look at DSG Partners. It's a consumer fund and doing so well since so many years. Look at Sixth Sense. Nikhil has done so well. Look at Elevation Capital. They raised $400 million fund recently. And look at, I hope you have heard the brand called Boat. Boat is speakers and headphones. It was created 4.5 years ago, and in a matter of 4 years, it has raised 100 million dollars recently. So this shows, the power of the Indian consumer. Now, how do funds, what other factors do VC funds, venture capital funds look before investing? Apart from product market fit and minimum viable product, they look at founder market fit. Now, you might be a very intelligent student, you might be a very intelligent person, but if you have not worked in a particular sector, then you don't have the experience. And if you don't have the experience, it gives you an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is you have a fresh mind. You can think new thoughts as to how things can be done better. And that is the creativity which a lot of companies seek. But the disadvantage is you will start making those mistakes which others have already made. And hence, in a founder market fit, what VC funds look for is someone who really understands the sector well. So, to give you an example, if you have no idea about how artificial intelligence and machine learning works, and if you are creating an AI based company, you will tend to pay the wrong people. You will also make mistakes like overpaying. You will make mistakes in terms of timelines because you are learning, and there is no harm in learning. But somebody will pay for that. So founder market fit is something which VC funds look for. They look at scalability, and that's where technology comes in. Smartphone, which we use, is why Apple commands $2 trillion valuation, why Warren Buffett, the greatest investor in the world, invested in Apple when it was already $1.2 trillion valuation, because he saw the stickiness of the product, which is a smartphone. It is very difficult to let go of a smartphone, and the whole sectors like Uber and Ola in the auto sector, Big Basket in groceries, Amazon and Flipkart in e-commerce, Urban Clap, Urban Company, which is now called, in services, the fintech companies like Paytm, like PhonePe, like Google Pay, they're all created on mobile platforms. And this mobile platform is a universal platform. So it gives you what the VC wants: scalability. If you create an app, you can offer a service on the mobile phone, and it can be scaled unendingly. There is no point to which it cannot be scaled. Of course, if it is not an information based app, it is a services based app. It has to have huge operations in the back end. Uh, but if it is a hyper local company like Big Basket, you have to have service delivery, warehousing, you have to have logistic support. But if it is a information based company, then it is still more easier. If it is Look at other companies which have created big businesses out of the smartphone. Look at Airbnb. It is an aggregator, just an aggregator. Uber, it has no assets, it is an aggregator. Amazon, it's a platform, it doesn't own the stuff it sells, it is an aggregator. So everybody is trying to create an aggregator on the smartphone. So, what do VC funds look other than product market fit, founders market fit, scalability? They look at barriers to entry. Now, what are barriers to entry? If you create a new technology and you have already applied and got intellectual property for that technology, so it is not easy for any other deep pocketed player. It's not easy for any company to just say, I'm committing $100 million to this sector, and just start out and create a competitor of yours. It's not easy. And because you have the intellectual property, and if anyone tries to copy you, you will get paid for it as per law. To give you an example, Singapore has the largest and the best intellectual property based ecosystem financing. So it means that if you have intellectual property, the government will collateralize, will keep the intellectual property as collateral, just like a bank keeps real estate as collateral, and it will give you a lot of financing against that intellectual property. Now you think of it, there is a young startup founder. He doesn't have real estate to give to bank as collateral. He doesn't have deep pockets, but he knows technology, and he knows how to build a technology which has intellectual property. So imagine the support he can get by just perfecting that technology, by offering it as collateral to the government and getting $10 million, getting $20 million, and so on. That is the kind of financing which is available. So uh, just like product market fit, founders market fit, scalability, barriers to entry, then there are moats. What are moats? So if you have visited a fort of some old king, you have these water around the around the fort, so that invaders don't enter the fort. That is called a moat. And how VCs talk about moats is, to give you an example, there are network modes. What are network modes? Now, Amazon has so many suppliers on its platform. Amazon also has so many customers on its platform. And because customers are there, hence a new supplier has to be on Amazon because customers are there. And because suppliers are there, so customers have to go to Amazon because all suppliers are sitting there. So the monopoly of having so much of network in suppliers and customers becomes a moat. It is a moat which is difficult to breach. It is difficult to replicate, and that is called a network moat. To give you one more example, Gillette sells razors, and the razor which Gillette sells is costly. So, it's costlier as compared to other razors. When you buy a Gillette razor, you buy that also, the blade also. And when you start using the Gillette razor and the blade finishes, you don't want to throw away the razor because you bought it at a high price. And because you bought it at a high price, you go to the market and you buy another costly blade of Gillette. So what happens is that you don't want to throw away the blade because you paid really high for it, but you keep on paying a lot for the blades. So Gillette earns because its razor is high cost. That becomes a moat for Gillette. So, that is one thing which VC funds look for. They are called moats. So, you might be having a very good business, but have you really built a moat around it? Have you built barriers to entry like intellectual property? Have you perfected your PMF, your product market fit? Have you perfected your founders market fit? If you are a non-tech guy and you are creating a tech business, then you should go out and get a tech co-founder so that there is founders market fit. And yeah, they basis the experience of the team, the startup will be very attractive to the venture capital fund. Apart from that, generally VC funds, they are averse to single founder companies. They like to see teams. If you look at your story, VC Circle, you look at the fundings which happen, you will see that usually there are 2 to 3 founders, co-founders and founders. So it's good to have a team, and not a single founder company. Now, similarly, what other factors which VC fund look for is that whatever money you are raising right now, you in till how long will it last? Usually, the metric, the ballpark figure, the thumb figure is 18 months. So you should be raising money for 12 to 18 months, preferably 18 months. And the VC fund also likes to see total addressable market, TAM. So, I was advising a company which is into SaaS-based software as a service, SaaS-based distributor product for pharmaceuticals. And so, we had good talks with other co-investors. I was also looking at that company very interestingly to invest. And when we calculated the TAM, total addressable market, it came out to be very low because in India, there are too many distributors. It's a very unorganized market, and the cost of organizing is also high. And if we added the revenue of all the distributors, it turned out that The total addressable market was small. Now, if you are investing in a company as a VC and the total addressable market is small, then your valuation can't really go too much. And a valuation is a product of, it is in multiples of the revenue, multiples of the operating profit. So, TAM is one figure. Then they really like VC funds, they really like that their money, which they put, it doesn't go in working capital. They say cost of capital, equity capital is 40% plus, and cost of loan is 12%. So instead of taking equity money for working capital, you should use loan money, which costs less. And they don't like to see their money go for working capital. They like to see the money go for building teams, high quality teams, and they love seeing that money go in marketing, especially in digital marketing, because they feel that capturing a market share is very important, and that can be achieved. Scalability can be achieved if their money goes in marketing. I know of a fund which was talking to one of a pharma tech client of mine, and the fund said 92% of their money, which they will be giving around $1.5 million, should go in marketing. So, that is the kind of metric they have in mind. But let me advise you something else. After you all would have heard about WeWork, the co-living company, the biggest co-working company. Their IPO on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, it got devolved. It means it didn't come. It wasn't able to, come. It didn't get launched. And WeWork was valued privately by SoftBank at $47 billion. And 47 billion was the valuation, and their IPO didn't even come at $8 billion valuation, because WeWork used to burn a lot of cash in for getting market share. It was not profitable per unit. So after that incident where the WeWork IPO got devolved, the investors have become very conscious about unit economics, about unit metrics. It means that in the race for getting market share, you should be in profit, as in you should be making a money on each product or service, each unit you sell. You should not be losing money. See, any average guy can take VC money, burn it for getting market share, and tell I have 10% market share, I'm sitting in $200 million losses. That doesn't work for VC funds anymore. But having said that, if you are profitable in terms of unit economics and you are capturing market share by utilizing your money for marketing in a good way, they welcome it. So, what another metric which matters to VC funds is CAC, customer acquisition cost. So, customer acquisition cost is the money you burn on marketing for getting one customer. And if you are an internet-based company, then they look at other metrics like total active users. And your website might be getting a lot of users, but how many of them are active, and how many are actually buying stuff from you? So those things, they matter a lot. Now coming to some other factors like how is the global economy panning out? So what has happened was that after just around the time India opens its economy, that time the globalism was catching on, and economies were opening up, signing free trade agreements. And after what in the recent past, after China did what no country has done in the history of Mother Earth. In the matter of 30 years, China went from a $0.5 trillion economy to $14 trillion economy. 28 times it grew in 30 years. So what has happened is because China has is a single party government, so there are many issues which democracies and liberal economies have with China, and so protectionism is gaining ground. Companies are not signing free trade agreements; they are protecting their markets. Donald Trump, as the U.S. president, he put curbs on imports. He put curbs and duties, custom duties on imports. He put curbs on the visas which are issued to professionals like green card and service visas like H1B. And because this protectionism has been growing, so a lot of companies are creating local subsidiaries. So instead of operating in a sector in India, they will create a company here which will do the business. So this has led to a lot of opportunity for venture capital funds to put in money in the local country like India. Uh, so, how to approach investors. Now, if you are all, students, I wish very well for you. And I'm sure, you came here, gave your time to attend this webinar. So there is, you are motivated to do something. Now, how do you approach investors? Now, the first thing is whenever you decide to open a company, open a startup, you should be do a lot of research. Do you know how much research Japan and Japanese companies do before entering any market and opening a company? They research for 10 years. I'm not saying you do research for 10 years, but what I'm saying is be thorough in your research, what you want to create, and enter the right sector. And once you are very sure what you want to create, then secondly, instead of looking for seed funding, which means funding just at the idea stage, you take some money from friends and family, FNF. In the VC terminology, it is called FNF. Take some small money from them, start off start off creating a product, creating a tech product which is unique, really won't take that much money. Once you do that, then start perfecting your proof of concept, then minimum viable product, then product market fit. Once product market fit is achieved, start revenue. If you have a revenue of 30 lakhs, I can assure you, you can raise equity funds at almost 3 crore valuation. So you can raise 50 lakhs at 3 crore valuation, which would mean around 16% equity only you will have to give. If you get 50 lakh turnover, you can almost get a valuation of 4 to 5 crores. If you are still do better, if you do 1 crore turnover, I can assure you, you will get a valuation of 8 to 10 crores. Probably 6, 7, or but 8 to 10 you will get. So it's better to raise money later when your revenue has started. Don't try and raise money earlier, because you will, somebody who's trying to raise money earlier, how does a VC fund or an investor look at it? They feel there is no business on the ground, everything is on paper, there are reports, there are projections, everything is on paper. So he is betting on you as a founder because there is nothing else. So you are the horse on which he is betting. So valuation becomes an issue. How to value the company? How much money can the angel investor put, and what kind of equity will he get? It becomes a problem. So my advice to you is first generate revenue, and then you go out and raise funding. And always aim for a business which does not depend on VC money, investor money only. If you are confident of creating a product and service which generates profits, generates cash flows on its own, then nothing better than that. Look at the example of Zoho. Zoho, created by a techie from Chennai, never raised VC money, never raised outside money, always bootstrapped. Bootstrapped means that own money. Got a valuation of more than $1 billion, which means it became a unicorn. It created jobs in 30 villages in Tamil Nadu. The guy has recently been awarded with Padma Shri with what he did for the image of an Indian techie. And instead of giving equity for fancy market shares, he just concentrated on his product, continuously churned out quality products, continuously got huge market shares, put that money back in creating new products, and became market leader, and hence became a company with more than $1 billion valuation. That is your, somebody you can look up to, follow. I'm not saying VC money is bad. If something is helping you achieve faster growth, helping you achieve better market shares, faster market shares, it is not bad. But if your focus is take money from venture capitalists, take money from investor, burn it, and so the whole aim of having a beautiful product and service, solving a fundamental human problem, the whole aim gets lost. Now, how do people, founders, spot opportunity to create beautiful companies? Always remember, you have to solve a fundamental human problem. Look at some years back. Somebody used to tell me, Tushar, can you get us a taxi? I had to go to the stand, wake up the taxi guy with black and yellow taxi, and that was the situation. So it was a fundamental human problem. What Uber did was, uh, the taxi is available on the click of a button. The taxi, the app has map in it. The app has proper pricing numbers there. It has rating system, and all this technology solved the basic human problem. So, I deal with a robotic company from Gurgaon. So as you know that because of COVID, disinfection has to be done, and lot of people are use PPE kits, that kits to do disinfection. So this Gurgaon company, it has created robos which disinfect buildings, and the Western company which has such kind of robos is Germ Falcon. Germ Falcon's robos are 10 times more costlier than this Gurgaon company, and these Gurgaon company's robos are more customizable and superior product. So what this company did was, that these sewers and manholes, they are cleaned by municipal corporations by sending people down there, which is called manual scavenging. It is a bad practice. It is an abhorrent practice. And Supreme Court of India recently has struck down human scavenging. So this company in Gurgaon has created robos for robotic scavenging. So, disinfection, robotic scavenging, then food delivery. They have created robots for food delivery. So they are trying to solve a fundamental human problems by using technology. This is what is to be done. Now, apart from anybody wanting to make a career in startup space, investment space, in corporates, but there is always an opportunity to create a career in as a consultant. So management consulting is a huge field. You have Bain, you have McKinsey, you have these amazing companies. I'd like to take you through a little bit about consulting as a career as well. There is a strategy consulting, strategy consultants. They are consultants who operate at the highest level of the consultancy market, and they focus on strategic topics like corporate and organizational strategy, economic policy, government policy, functional strategy. Then there are management consultants. They are also called business consultants, and they are organizational advisors in practice. And it's a collective term. Management consulting is a collective term used for all services that fall under strategy consulting, operations consulting, and HR consulting. So, more than half of the advisors you see out there, they can be defined as a management consultant. Then operational consultant. Operations consultant, uh, it gives advisory services for hands-on implementation support for like primary functions like sales, marketing, production, and secondary functions which assist the primary functions like finance, HR, supply chain, legal, etc. Then there are financial advisory consultants. I have worked for financial advisory at Deloitte and Touche. So we help companies in private equity, due diligence, valuation, raising funds and so on, mergers and acquisitions, risk management, tax restructuring, real estate consulting. All these are financial advisory. Then a human resource consultant. So what has happened is that human resource has gained a lot of ground as a subject. If you know how to manage people, you will do very well in life, because that's the biggest trait any person can have. And what HR consultants do is they help management manage the people better. And it can be change management in terms of employment, learning and development, talent management, retirement issues. Then, because technology has been the forefront, so IT consultants have taken a lot of, it's a very good career to have. So, they they can be like day-to-day IT operations, or they can work on implementation projects, specific projects like ERP system applications and so on. So consulting is one field which you can look at. Now, to little bit add more on, I know a lot of people who are seeing today are from humanities. Let me give you a perspective on career in humanities and how can you use technology to create a better career in humanities. Now, India is a little bit dampener kind of market for humanities. If you are a humanities person and you do, you clear IAS, you clear any civil service, it's a good way of making a career. But how many people can become IAS? The percentage chance is so less. So it's better to make your career in a way which is aligned with business. So that option is there. We saw so private universities focusing on humanities, and the students which are also coming out in humanities. My top regards to them. They are very nice, and I really like those. So I hope you all would have heard about cryptocurrency, about DeFi, which is decentralized finance, about NFT, which is non-fungible token. So let me explain you a bit more how you can use these technologies to create a business out of humanities, out of creativity, out of your knowledge about arts and about history, about geography, about civics, and so on. But mostly about creativity. And when we talk about creativity, so if you are an arts person, you know how to make a very good painting, you know how to create a very good song. Do you know today's students who play Sony PS4, Xbox, uh, how hooked they are? to the games, they spend like hours every day, and they are so hooked to it, they just can't come out of it. And do you know the amount of money they spend? Now, if you are a creative person, if you are an arts person, and you create a beautiful sword in a game within Sony PS4, and that sword sells for $1, do you know how many people will buy that sword? How much company the money the company will earn? It is mind-boggling. So just like gamification has opened up opportunities for creative people, I work with a company based in Gurgaon. They have created an app which is gamifying education. So just like you play all these games which are very interesting, they have beautiful sounds, they have colors, they have ways in which it's moving. Candy Crush, they have created the entire uh, education content as a game on the app, and within a matter of 3 years, they are doing a turnover of 35 crores. And who has invested in the company? Mr. Amitabh Bachchan is a shareholder. Mr. Deepak Parekh, the grandfather of Indian banking, chairman of HDFC, world's best performing bank is HDFC. And the guy who did it is Deepak Parekh. And Deepak Parekh has invested in that company. So you can imagine the huge opportunities in gamification, in creative work, in digital creative work. Now, how can you make use of NFT, non-fungible tokens, to make a career in creative work? Now, what has happened is that NFT is like a currency, is like a token which has some assets at its back. The asset can be anything. It can be real estate. It can be any content. It can be a painting. Now, if you have created a painting, you create a digital version of the painting, or you directly create a painting on the digital version. You put it on a marketplace which sells it as a NFT, as a non-fungible token. What is a non-fungible token? A non-fungible token is which cannot be replicated. It cannot be created again because it is unique. So suppose you have created a digital painting, it is unique. It cannot be created again. So the token which will represent that painting will be an NFT, non-fungible token. And you will put your that creative digital painting on a marketplace like Rarible, like OpenSea, and there is so much of money sloshing around in the global ecosystem. There are collectors who buy this for like thousands of dollars, for hundreds and thousands of dollars. And if you are creating this unique things which can be used in gaming like swords and all those things, or paintings. Recently a collector, he spent almost $2 million, around 15 crores, on collectibles, digital collectibles which were created for NBA, the American Basketball League. You create, use your creativity to sell your creativity on marketplaces which value your creativity through NFT, non-fungible token. And I will give you the example how it works. So just like, you go and buy a diamond. Now diamond comes with a certificate that it is not a blood diamond, it is a genuine diamond. It has not been mined by children, it is no child labor and stuff like that. So there is a proof of chain of custody that this diamond was sold to this person, then this person. Now what happens in NFT is, because the underlying technology is blockchain. Blockchain means all the records of what happened in the past are there in the system. They can't be taken away. So it works like a ledger. So if you are creating an NFT, whatever, when you sell your creative art, your painting, with how many hands it will change, the record will be there. So that is the beauty of the technology. And what happens is, because all the records can never be removed, part of the record can never be removed. So it works as a very efficient KYC, know your customer. Now the beauty of NFT is, suppose I were to tell you, you create a physical painting, you do an auction, you do a physical auction, or you open a creative company and you list your company on the stock exchange. You will have to go through investment bankers, legal regulations, SEBI regulations, this and that. But in the case of NFT, it is a global marketplace. Anybody from the world using that marketplace can buy your NFT by paying you in crypto. And so it does open up some problems also. So people have somebody's tokens get lost, and some people, they collect all the money and run away and stuff like that. But mostly from the perspective of monetizing your creativity, it is a good opportunity. India, it is a problem still, because the government is thinking of banning cryptos, and so crypto is different, blockchain is different. Okay, don't confuse the two. So the government is thinking of banning cryptos and NFT and DeFi, decentralized finance, but still it has not been banned. And if you are residing outside India, then you can, depending on the laws of the country, you can make use of it. And so what is happening is that more things are going into bits and bytes, from being on paper, like real estate ownership, like creative work ownership, and all this digital ownership, will definitely keep on increasing. Just like crypto, Bitcoin, its value has increased to now more than $1 trillion. So, most likely all the works which are created in NFT, they will keep on increasing in the midterm. I don't know about the longer term, but in the midterm, money is chasing that. And now even banks are putting in money into NFTs, into DeFis. And Ethereum is a currency which is very secure kind of currency, and people are using the standards which have been set by Ethereum, like ERC 1155, which is a new standard, and people are using that. And I believe that this is a big opportunity for creative people to enter the field, and make some good money from this opportunity. Now, I don't know what else I can talk about, so I will ask Professor Tej Pavan to in case you would like to ask me anything more on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tusharji. Really appreciate your session. Let me first just check if there's any questions or comments
Sure.
from our audience,
Sure.
because that would be ideal. So, students, I'd love for you to engage with Mr. Kansal and use this opportunity. So, why don't you please raise your hands, or if the early birds are very happy for you to just start voicing out your questions, and for the others, while someone's talking, the rest of you could just raise your hands. It'll help us. Plan the conversation. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Um, so I see some of the questions here during my talk.
Yeah.
So can I take them? See if
Yeah,
this.
please. I think Akash is perhaps.
Okay.
Or any. Yeah, take any that you think are interesting.
Okay. Akash, what major venture capitalists prefer, blue or red ocean? So much, why are you not focusing on like 3M, which has 60,000 products? Indian, okay. So India, the problem specifically, a lot of students here would have parents from traditional families, And I mean traditional business families. So what has happened is that traditionally we had all this socialist factors. So if you have more than 20 employees, then there are so many regulations. If you have more than 200 labor staff, you have so many regulations. And it was the reverse on which China worked. So the bigger you are, the more support you received. But things have actually changed a lot. If 60 labor codes have 59 labor codes have been converted to 4 labor codes. And look at from the perspective of foreign direct investment, FDI, India is the most open economy in the world, even more open than the US. We have no limits to FDI in all sectors, just barring a few like single brand retail, like nuclear, like defense. Defense also is now open. So things are changing. A little bit problem is that a businessman needs access to capital, and he needs access to cheap loans. That is a problem because loans are here 8%, 10% interest rate, and that becomes a problem. But it's a legacy issue of the banking system. That's where the opportunity is to get venture capital. And in case you are creating a unique, even in case of a non-technology, I mean, my whole talk was around technology, but even if you are creating a non-technology product, you can get venture capital. So recently there is this company based in Delhi. It is a confectionery manufacturing company. They raised $25 million. It's a traditional business, but they raised $25 million from a European venture capital fund, which is based in Delhi. And there is a microbrewery company. They have 6 microbreweries in Gurgaon, and they raised $10 million uh, from a European angel from VC venture capital fund. And look at EV companies. Not all these companies. There is a company which is based in Amritsar, and it supplies EV vehicles to the drivers of Big Basket, Flipkart, and so the technology it doesn't own, but it is solving a fundamental problem. The drivers of Big Basket, Grofers, Flipkart, and Zomato, Swiggy, they pay 3 rupees per kilometer, and if they use electric vehicle, they pay 1 rupee per kilometer, something like that. It's a saving of almost one third, two thirds. So because of that, they are offering these vehicles, and they got funded 2 times already. So you should be solving some market problem, and you can raise a lot of venture capital. Mr. Shubh Sharma says, okay, now about cryptocurrency. Let me give you a perspective. Gold prices are going up since the last 20 years, and gold is available. One can have mining, one can get gold out, and gold trades like a commodity. So people are betting on gold, and its value keeps on increasing. Now, other commodities also value keeps on changing. Oil and gas is going down, and so since 12 to 15 trillion dollar of currency has been printed by the Western governments, all this money, a lot of it has gone into speculation. Speculation means stock markets, commodities, it means real estate, it means startups, it means all this thing. And crypto has become an asset class in which this money is going. And why did they create crypto? I don't know who created. They say some Japanese guy did it. But 1,000 people in the world, 1,000, they hold 40% of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. And once these 1,000 people decide to sell and others are buying, then crypto won't have a leg to stand on. It's a pure speculation. And because it is a pure speculation, that is why you can't use a cryptocurrency. What kind of a currency is such that you can't use it? It is just a resider of value. value in the sense its value keeps on growing up. So the Indian government, see what the Chinese government did. I'm saying don't think that the Indian government is very smart. At least you think that the Chinese government is smart, right? And the Chinese government have banned cryptocurrencies. Rather, they have created their own digital currency, digital yuan. So what the Indian government is wanting to say is we will create a digital rupee. So instead of betting your money into Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dogecoin, and this and that, put your money into digital rupee. So they will allow you to trade on digital rupee. Uh, I don't see what kind of value gets created by people putting in money uh, into cryptocurrency. But if I look at an investor, I look at it as an investor. If I am wanting to make returns and there is a currency, so-called cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, which goes from $14,000 to a Bitcoin to $50,000 in a matter of 6 months, then I would want to earn that money as well, to earn that return as well. So somebody who can make money in that is making money. But in the long term, what the Indian government is doing is a very fundamental thing. They are saying that this is pure speculation and hence they want to ban it. If I were to do something, I would have regulated it instead of banning it. And that is a better way capitalistic economies work. So that is the answer.
Mr. Kansal, I think there's a sort of a follow-up question that
Understood.
Vishal
Yeah,
has.
sure. Yeah, it's a very, very beautiful question. Very, very beautiful question. So, blockchain, as I said, blockchain is a way in which all the records of a particular transaction they get maintained, and because they get maintained, so it is easy to trace the transactions which happened in the past. And why is blockchain important for our talk is that look at Indian accounting. So I remember Prime Minister Modi was addressing the CAs in a CA conference, and he said that he's not very happy with the way CAs work in our country and the accounting standards and so on. Now, if blockchain were to be used for maintaining accountancy-based records like ledgers and invoices and all the paperwork, then you can imagine how difficult it will become to manipulate any transaction. So that is where the benefit of blockchain can come in. There are some people who say that blockchain does have some issues because the records they reside in different servers, and that's why they can't be manipulated. But because of that, it does become slow. It slows down the speed of the transaction. So that is a downside, but the upsides are actually many.
Yeah, this brings again to the point, your earlier point about the fundamental difference between crypto versus blockchain. And perhaps that also seals together your previous comment, Mr. Consul, about that, people are equating mere trading, speculation, investment in the existing sort of, cryptocurrencies as somehow, enhancing the tech system or taking the Indian ecosystem forward, which is, not necessarily worth conflating. So very, very useful discussion. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So guys, please keep popping your stuff in chat or raising hands so we can sort of figure out how to steer and plan the discussion. I did notice a raised hand earlier with by Professor Tomer, Meenakshi Tomer. Professor, are you there? Did you want to raise a comment or a question?
I can probably add a little bit more points, Professor Tejpavan, on the cryptocurrency part.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Prof. Tomer. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Am I audible?
It's a little garbled, but I can hear you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Glitch. So first of all, many thanks. Okay, many thanks, Mr. Tushar, for such an insightful sharing of the facts. At least I was never aware of so many of them. So out
Thank
of
you.
curiosity, hailing from a marketing background, I do have a question for you. When you talked about companies like Gillette and many others to name, where funding is viewed from many aspects, what contribution do you see a marketing department making over here with respect to the image that the product or the brand holds in the market? And how do you think that this also gets accounted for somewhere where we talk about global investment scenario?
See, I have been in this. Thank you so much for your question, Professor. It's a very nice question. Now, the thing is, I have been in this startup space since 7 years. One of the lines which ex startup founders, they, while mentoring the new ones, they says, fake it till you make it. Now, the thing is, I don't agree with this line, but it has a marketing connotation to it. So, a startup guy has to be a marketeer. I mean, I remember there were drinks, organic drinks like Glossiu. A brand had come up in the US called Glossiu, and I was watching this guy on CNBC TV 18, and he marketed his brand so well. I mean, the company, it got sold for $300 million to Coke. And from the perspective of being a seller of your product, your service, more than that, you also have to sell your company to the investor, to the customer, to the government, to the to the regulators. To You have to be a marketer to all the parties in the ecosystem, to your suppliers, to your employees, to your board of directors, to your to your team. Yeah, so I mean, marketing is the biggest skill which is required to succeed in any ecosystem, and more so in the startup ecosystem. I'll give you an example. Uh, uh, Two things. One is Andy Newman, the guy who owns WeWork. He had just created a small co-working space in the US, and he was trying to raise funding. And he got to know that SoftBank's owner is coming to New York, and through some contacts, he just wanted a meeting. He just wanted a meeting. I mean, SoftBank is the biggest venture capital fund in the world, and the tech fund. He got 18 minutes of SoftBank guy's time. The guy was going on a taxi from some place in the New York to the airport, and in those 18 minutes, God knows what brilliant marketing he did with the guy, that SoftBank ended up putting almost $3 to $4 billion in WeWork. And the SoftBank's founder is Masayoshi Son, is also called Masa. And look at the marketing skill of Andy Newman. So when you talk about marketing, ultimately what value you make the other person realize, that is marketing. And in today's times, a thing like cryptocurrency, which cannot be used anywhere, it is just a digital number. It is selling for $50,000 on the back of marketing. It is, marketing and marketing only, which is sustaining these numbers. To give you an example, uh, those founders who have been very good proponents of their business and of their company have always come out to make unicorns, to make $1 million companies. You know what Elon Musk, who recently became the richest person on the planet, how he marketed his SpaceX project. SpaceX is a project which is creating a constellation of low Earth moving, Earth orbiting satellites which will deliver internet to remote parts of the Earth. Now he wanted to market SpaceX. So, uh, he instead of making his reusable rocket land on some part on Earth, he made it land on a jetty on the ocean which had high winds. And first time it was not successful, second time it was not successful. The moment it was successful, it sent $100 billion message to the world about that technology. There is little bit of showmanship, but look at the marketing behind it. Uh, he uh, Tesla, he sent Tesla a car with a mock driver dummy on a SpaceX rocket on to space, and that particular car, Tesla car, is rotating on Earth's orbit, and there is a live video of that car, and people watch that a Tesla went to space on a SpaceX rocket, and the songs are playing there and a live video feed is there. It is it's pure marketing, he's a marketing genius. I mean, just like Shah Rukh Khan is like marketing genius, so you should, apart from having a good product, you should know how to market your product and be a brand ambassador of your own product. And this is what successful founders have been doing all this while. I mean, uh, that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Parv, do you want to voice out your question, Parv Chawla?
Yeah, sure, sir. Good evening, everyone. So, sir, my question is regarding co-founder. Since you mentioned if you belong from a non-tech background and you end up opening some AI company or some tech-related company, so you select a co-founder that it attributes those skills. So, in case I want to open up a company, and yes, there are other tech people out there, but what qualities do I need to look for when choosing a right co-founder, because it's for a long-term vision? What are the key things as a venture capitalist you see that, yeah, this is a perfect team that I would love to invest into, whether if it's a perfect fusion of tech people and a not tech people?
So, a lot of technical people who are very good in technology are actually, they are called in the US, in the Silicon Valley, they're called nerds. And the reason why they're called nerds is because they sometimes tend to lag on the human interaction skills, on the that. But having said that, if a guy is good in technology, he believes in what you are creating. That's the very important point. He should believe in your vision, and he should get fully.
God bless.
Excuse me.
Gesundheit.
Yeah, and if he believes in the vision, then to give you an example, Mark Zuckerberg, he believed in Facebook, and what he did was, he said once he had opened the site, and he had kept it exclusively for Harvard students, and he saw that people were flocking in droves to open an account there. So he saw that it is succeeding. Next, what he did was, all the other people who were living next to his room, all those students, he told them to pool money and take equity in the Facebook company. And how many of them did? Those who did they have their own funds. They are billionaires. So, the main important point is, like Eduardo Saverin, he believed, he took 30%. He put in his money. So you have to find in your co-founder a believer. He believes in your project, and he has the technological skill and the patience to be with you. Nobody is guaranteeing any success. So, 90 to 92% of the startups which open, they fail to receive follow-on funding and close down. That is why it's called the riskiest asset. But because there is a portfolio approach by VC funds, so even 1 or 2 out of 10 investments, if they do well, they tend to do very well, exponentially well. So from there, the returns come. So one thing is your tech guy, he should be a believer. Secondly, he should have patience. Third, he should have the tech skill, which is of course, very important. And I think beyond these three things, of course, I don't think many other things matter.
Parv, does that address your question? Do you have any other follow-up?
Yeah, sure, sir. Like, it's a very beautiful articulation. Thank you for answering it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Great. Well, we've had a fairly extensive discussion. I would appreciate if I could get some guidance from our students about if there's any other topics or any other questions, so we can pace the discussion. We only got another 5 odd minutes of our allotted time. Otherwise, Mr. Kansal and I can happily bubble away for a few minutes. Which I'm looking forward to, by the way, on a separate occasion. I think there's lots of
I look forward to it, sir. I look forward to it, sir. And and it's very heartening to see the entire team you have assembled. They all look very, very capable, and and so humble, and it's amazing to talk to them, and the hunger for listening more, learning more, it's just like a fresh student, so that is the biggest quality which so thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your very valuable insights. It's very, very helpful for our students and participants, and we really appreciate this. And I think we will. There's many of these discussion topics that I think we'll maybe set up a separate, more in-depth conversation. I think I'd love to chat with you more about the ed tech, going deeper into the ed tech space, also about the early stage, the pre-VC or the non-VC ecosystem in the Indian context. And I think also as we are building, Startup JGU at JGU, I think we would love to engage with you, Mr. Kansal, and seek your insights, particularly about the legal tech space and some of the creative tech, as well as some of the social enterprise areas, because these are quite different ecosystems to some of the multi-billion-dollar SPACs and what have you that we are currently seeing. A significant amount of momentum over the last year or so. So I think these are very worthy, individual discussion topics that perhaps we can pick up in your VC channel podcast sort of mode. So we look forward to that, and thank you so much.
Thank you
once again for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to you. Thank you to the college, and thank you to your entire team and the students. They have been just wonderful. I mean, they're the whole inputs, and they're so they have such an appetite for these questions. Thank you so much, sir, for your time, and it was really lovely to be addressing all your students here today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good day, sir.
All right, guys, we will wrap up now. So for those of you who are cricket enthusiasts, you can still hopefully catch up. And the news at Botera is that the match is all but over. So you'll have the rest of your weekend to use up for your JGBS education. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.